have a very distinguished guest that we are very honored to have here, Icelandic composer Atli Örvarsson, who has been working a lot in Hollywood, both in films and TV. But we're going to start this off. My name is Gunnar Hansson. I'm the moderator here today. I'm a really famous Icelandic actor. But we're going to start off with a video here. This will show kind of a taste of what Icelandic composers have been doing in films and TV. And this is 17 minutes, just to warn you, but it's fun. Okay, as you could see there, that was like even though that's 17 minutes and a lot of names, but that's just a taste of Icelandic composers. The last one we saw was from Atli Örvarsson, and he's our special guest here today. We could have had 17 minutes of his work, easily. And I would just like to say that this seminar here, or this discussion today, is a cooperation between Riff and Úttón, or IMX, Icelandic Music Export. So now I would like to welcome our guest of honor, Atli Örvarsson, composer. Grab a seat and the mic. You can hold it if you want, or however you like.
I think it's easier.
That's easier. Welcome to Riff.
Thank you.
And
Thanks
welcome.
for having me.
Yeah, our honor. Welcome back to Iceland. You've been living for 22 years in America now.
Yes, it's been about 22 years with some breaks, but actually 23 with breaks. So it's about 22 years altogether.
Okay, you're in the music industry, so you know about feedback. So I'm gonna,
yeah,
I'm gonna turn the volume a little bit down. That should work.
That's probably better. Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
I'll speak louder.
Okay. So you have moved back to Iceland. You moved back home.
Yes. As of 2 months ago, we came to we're going to be here for a couple of months for the summer with the children, me and my wife, and she decided we weren't going back, so here we are. Now we live in Iceland.
Okay,
and I'm really, really happy to be back in Iceland.
Well, we're happy to have you back. Most people, at least here from Iceland, they know you first from the pop, or from a band, or two bands actually, that you are very well known in as a pop artist. But then what happened? The bands, for you foreign people, stood company. How would you translate that? The company of fun. Yes. Which was like when you were like very young, and then you went into another one that's probably the biggest band in Iceland, Sálin.
Yes. Yeah, there were some others along the way as well, but yeah. Well, what happened basically is that at the time, the world was very, very different, you know. I think with the internet and with Björk and of Monsters and Men and all these other brilliant Icelandic artists who've basically, they've changed the landscape for young Icelandic musicians, in my opinion, in the sense that at the time when, you know, this is 20-something years ago that I was playing in bands, you know, the market was really Iceland, and breaking out was very difficult, and now, you know, Icelandic music is a worldwide phenomenon, if you will, and you know, young musicians in Iceland now, they're not really just thinking about Iceland, if they're even thinking about Iceland at all. I mean, they think about the world. But at the time, it was different, and I, you know, at the time, Icelanders hadn't even reached 300,000. So I felt that I had sort of reached some sort of a barrier in terms of, I don't know, getting my music out there, and I wanted to try something different. So I decided to go to college in Boston, and you know, 22 years later, I'm coming back.
How did you get into film composing? How did you get into making music for film and TV?
It was actually at Berklee College of Music in Boston. I have to say, you know, even when I was playing in rock and roll bands and pop bands, I never really sort of felt that I'd found, you know, my calling, if you will. And even composing, you know, writing pop songs never really appealed to me that much. But I just decided to try a course in film music at Berklee, and the first time I ever wrote music to picture, I just knew that that was it. And there's something about the alchemy between the images and music that's greater than the sum of its parts, in my opinion. So yeah, it was just something that spoke to me.
But I gather that getting into the film industry to work there, on the bigger scale in Hollywood, or it cannot be very easy. How did you break into the industry?
In my case, as I was finishing up my studies, I went on from Berkeley to the master's degree in composition, and I learned about this fellowship. This famous television composer, Mike Post. He, in honor of his partner who had passed away, he started this fellowship, which was basically about inviting young composers to come out to Hollywood to sort of get a foot in the door, and I can basically trace every single thing that ever happened since then to those 6 weeks or whatever it was. Yeah, I think Hollywood, and I don't know, I think it's really like this in almost any field, anywhere. It's about who you know, and then of course you have to work hard when you get the opportunity and to make your own opportunities. But it's really about connections.
You got into connection. You were connected with Hans Zimmer. Was that early on? Was that when you were just starting out?
Yeah, it was. Well, I worked with Mike for about 4 years or something like that. Then I went out. I got an opportunity to do the third movie about Stuart Little, which the first two, because
I was telling him, I was the voice of the father in the first two.
In Iceland. So, anyway,
I told you I'm a famous actor.
Yeah, he's more famous than you know. But no, so I was still working for Mike when I got the opportunity, and he graciously gave me a 2-month hiatus, I guess, or whatever. And when I came back, and he said, just go and do this on your own, and then I joined up with the same agency that he had, who happened to also be Hans's agent. And one day they said, you really should go and meet Hans. You'll fit right in with the rest of the Eurotrash down there. And apparently I did, because about a month later I'd moved my studio into Hans's machine, if you will.
Yeah. And you started working, and that kind of opened everything up, or what?
Yeah, it opened up a very sort of different world for me, because as I was working with Mike, I got to know a lot of people in the television industry, but Hans is really the modern king of film music. Yeah. Not necessarily in the sense of it being. It's not a judgment of his music, but it's really a judgment of his status in that world, and his power and his reach and his connections. So. Just working on a few movies with him, you get to know the heads of the music at all the big studios, and it's just sort of it's like a different world, So that was a huge step for me.
So the snowball started rolling.
Yeah, or kept rolling. It started escalating.
Yeah, it was already on the way.
It started getting a lot bigger.
But then, I'm curious, because I'm not a musician. For first, what's like the big difference between being a composer for films and the thing that you were before, just a musician in a band and stuff? What's like the fundamental difference in that?
Well, the fundamental difference is that you're a filmmaker, number one. Because I think it's sort of a common misconception about film music, to be honest with you. It takes a long, long time to understand the language of film and understand how music relates to that. So, you can be the most talented musician in the world, but it still takes a long time to just get into the world of film. And understanding how, I don't know, I think it's one of those things where, it's just about practice. It's about doing it. It's about that idea of it takes 10,000 hours to become good at anything. And it's sort of like that, back in the day when I got my first gig in Hollywood, which was to work on these American television series, Law and Order and some other shows, I was a little bit sort of, to be honest, I had a bit of a snobbish attitude about it. I was like, you know, what is this? I don't really like this music, and I don't watch the shows, and you know. And then I realized later that it was the best possible education in film music you could possibly get, because you had to write a lot of music very, very fast, and little by little you know, I guess, yeah, the language of film just seeps in.
Yeah.
So that's the biggest thing. I mean, it's like, you know, costume design. You know, these people are not fashion designers. They're not out there making clothes for people to buy in stores. It's specifically geared towards film. You know, and I think that I just, you know, my love for music and film came together in being able to do music in movies.
But how is the process for you? What's your method? When do you start? Do you start when you get the script in your hands, or when you see material from the movie, and do you work very closely with the director, or how is like the whole process if you from start to finish?
It's never the same twice, and the best possible scenario is to come in very early, and the last clip in my part of this video was from the movie Rams, and actually I wrote the theme before they started shooting the movie. In fact, the day before, something like that. And I went to, it was sort of like method composing almost, you know. I went to the valley where the movie takes place, where it was shot, which happens to be the valley from where my family is from, in the northern part of Iceland. And I just went to the church there, where my great-grandfather was the organ player, and jammed, you know, and that's literally how
on the organ.
Yeah.
Jammed.
Well, that old organ is now somewhere, you know, in storage, so it's a later organ, but it's the same space, same, you know. So to me, more and more, I mean, I think that it's very important to, you know, even physically be in the space where the film, or have been to the space where the film takes place, somehow get it into your, I don't know, into your consciousness, you know, into your, or subconsciousness. And so ideally, I mean, to me that was the best possible way of doing it. I did another movie which you showed a clip from called The Eagle with Kevin MacDonald, and he comes from a documentary background, and his thing was, you know, the music has to sound like it comes off the screen. And I said, well, the movie takes place in the year 140 AD. We don't really know what music sounded like then. And he says, of course we don't know what music sounded like then, but we can still get the sense, the flavor that it is off that place. And so in order to do that, I went to Scotland and I went to England, and I worked with local musicians and sampled their, well, I just worked with them and jammed with them and recorded that, and then I brought that into my studio in Los Angeles and started composing based on that. And somehow sort of bringing the DNA of the place is really, really important. And unfortunately, in most movies, the composer is brought on towards the end of editing the film, you know. And I believe very, very strongly that you'll get a better film if you bring the composer on earlier, and let the music develop as the film is developing.
And is it, I mean, it must be different, but working with directors, they have a lot of opinion on this. How does it go with dialogue between you and the director?
Again, you know, no two projects are the same, no two directors are the same. I think that, I think most film directors are very afraid of the composer and the music and what it's going to do to their film. And
they're generally afraid.
Yeah, and it's for a very good reason, because other than the script, you know, this is really the only thing that's written for the film. It's the only sort of thing that's composed or put down on paper somehow. And we all know that music has such a profound influence on how you feel about a scene or a whole movie. So, and at the same time, it's usually the thing that the director knows the least about and has the least control over. And they're all control freaks. There's a bunch of directors here, they know what I'm talking about. So, but seriously speaking, you know, most directors could light the scene, they could make the costumes if they had to, they could probably act, but most of them cannot write the music. So it's that one thing that comes at the end, which totally freaks them out. So my job is 80% counselor and 20% composer.
Have you had like a big clash? Have you brought some of your music and the director was not happy at all, and have you had to like change it all, or
just 2 days ago?
Just 2 days ago. Okay.
Well, no, I mean that's.
Do you fight for your? For your opinion? Do you fight for your point of view, or is it the director that just has the final word, or is it?
It's a dance, you know. I mean, oftentimes I do fight when I believe very, very strongly that what I've done is right. But most likely there's 7,000 other approaches that will be right as well. So it just depends. I mean, you can't make hard and fast rules about any of this. And again, I think it has to do with how comfortable the director is working with you and with the process of adding music to their film. It's like taking your child to the first day of preschool, you know, you're 2 years old and you bring him to school and you're like, here, take them and do something with them, you know, and it's very frightening, you know, typically in the beginning of the process, you know, whether it's at the script level or in the editing room or wherever you come in, the idea is to come up with a plan, or you know, the theme, the sound, the instrumentation, the feeling, etc., that will, because if that foundation is solid, then most likely it'll be a relatively easy, or not easy, it's never easy, it'll be a relatively peaceful process, you know? And so that's really the key. I mean, the longer I do this, the more I realize that it's about solving the puzzle in the beginning, really. You know, just find that one piece that somehow speaks to the director and it's like, this is your movie. And I mean, oftentimes that's sort of the job is when you have to write the main theme for a movie or something. It's like, can you encapsulate the whole film into 4 notes, you know? And that's the real art of film composing.
Into 4 notes. That's
3 notes. Well, however many notes it takes, you know, if it's 20, but usually simplicity is better.
Since we were showing this collage of Icelandic composers' work, and they have been getting more and more work internationally, and getting awards and everything, do you feel like, because you were in Hollywood, is Icelandic composers and filmmaking, is it making a bigger mark now? Is it getting a bigger focus and attention? Is it? Do you feel that in?
Absolutely, without a doubt. I think there's. I'll just speak.
Yeah. I was going to do this very discreetly so nobody will notice.
Well, I think there's some phenomenon going on here, you know, and I think all you have to do is look at that montage, you know, there's, you know, most of you have probably noticed that by now that in Iceland everything's measured by per capita, you know, we are the best looking people per capita in the world, and everything is, we're the best in every way per capita. So, along those notes, I think that we have the best film composers per capita on the planet. But seriously speaking, I mean, there is some sort of a musical, it's like the Icelandic music spring, if you will. You know, I mean, there's something going on, and most likely there's a very sort of sensible reason for it, which is the emphasis and the organization and the finances that went into really promoting music in schools in Iceland in the 80s and 90s, maybe even before that. You know, so, and at the same time, for some reason, Iceland is hip these days, and this combination is really creating a lot of interest in Icelandic music, and I find that you know, it's actually very helpful to be Icelandic in the film industry right now because it sparks a curiosity. So, I mean, it's sort of like endangered species / public relations that's working out somehow.
You're like a white tiger.
Yeah, a little bit. Very white.
Yeah, I was going to ask you this. He's bringing me new batteries. Did you think it?
For the video, we need to do this in the microphone. Do you think then it has, you know, helped you in any way? Because we're talking about now the last few years it's been opening up to Iceland, but you started before that. What was it like being an Icelander, getting into like a Hollywood machine? Did it raise interest? Did it help you, or did it maybe the opposite? Or
I think it was sort of probably it helped a little bit because there was a curiosity about, you know, it's like most people I meet in the United States have never met anybody from Iceland, you know. So it's sort of like, you know, I wouldn't say they want to, you know, poke you and see it, you know, but there's almost that sort of.
Are
like,
you real?
Yeah, it's like, you know, Iceland. That's so. I mean, it would at least sort of be some sort of an interesting. It's like a question mark, you know. What is that, you know? And I mean, I think that now it is different, as you're pointing out, you know. But when I was starting out 15 years ago, it was kind of it was more sort of, yeah, that's something weird and different, and it just depends on the person, you know. Some people in Hollywood are, you know, very, very curious about those kinds of things, but I would say, I mean, actually getting in with Hans Zimmer was the best possible place because it's a place full of weird Europeans, you know. And but if you really think about it, I mean, if you think about, for example, the big actors in Hollywood today. I mean, how many of those are English or Australian or, you know? And there is always and has always been a huge influx of people from Europe and from other parts of the world that have shaped Hollywood. And I mean, I think partially it's that old sort of immigrant thing. That's like, you know, maybe people who make their way over there and put all their work into it. They work a bit harder and they sort of, and Hans also had an interesting, sort of an observation, I guess you'd say, about it, which was that, you know, for us, we look at American society from the outside in a way. Even if you've lived there for a few years, it's still kind of strange and different, and you make observations about it, and maybe, you know, it's just for me to come back to Iceland after 22 years. I feel like I can observe it as a foreigner almost, and you make totally different observations than when you've been in that space your whole life. So I think that overall, I mean, you know, to be honest, there's no point in, I don't have a comparison. This is the only career I've ever had in Hollywood, but I think it's been, you know, it's been overall beneficial to be from here.
What about, since we saw from, the last film we saw from was Rams, right? The Icelandic movie. I mean, is it a huge difference? Because now you've been working in Hollywood on huge films, and then you come to Iceland and work on our small, cute films. What's the big difference for a composer? I mean,
in practical terms, the biggest difference is that Rams has 18 minutes of music, and a typical Hollywood movie has 90. So, I mean, that's the first thing. It's like Hollywood movies nowadays tend to have music wall to wall, which I think is a terrible shame. And you know, just I don't know. It's just a style that I don't really appreciate. But I think, you know, when you think about, you know, what does music bring to film? You know, why is it even there? You know, and obviously it's emotion, a sense of ambience, geography, style, culture, and all these things. And I think there's just, I mean, Grímur Hákonarson, who directed Rams, I mean, his directing style is all about sort of neorealism. You know, it's all about, you know, let's just make it look the way it is. It's almost to the extent of dogma, you know, Lars von Trier style, but not quite. But it's in that sort of European realism vein. So to him, the music almost is a bit intrusive. So the way he deals with it is, when the music plays, let's actually have it play, you know, and you listen to it, and it's the focal point. But outside of that, let's not have any music, because what's the point? You know, if you have a good script and good actors, then it should be able to hold. And in this case, it did. So, you know, but again, every project is different. I've done a television series here last year, and I mean, the function of the music of that was very much like it is in a US TV series. It's about creating pacing and vibes, and there was way, you know, there was almost as much music in the Icelandic series as I write for American series. So, you know, it's I think it's not necessarily Iceland or Europe versus America, but it's more the director and the kind of film that he wants to make.
Yeah.
But for me, I mean, it was a very conscious decision to come back to Europe, to come back to Iceland, and in a way, I don't know if you'd say reinvent my career, but sort of take a new detour. And I just came to the conclusion at some point that I really wanted to work on films that I would be interested in watching. You know, would I pay money to go see this movie at the theater? And I found that more and more, you know, either I wasn't getting those movies, or what comes out of the machine in Hollywood isn't what I want to watch. So I thought to myself, let's find a way to come back at, you know, sort of why do I love film in the first place, you know? And I have a very, very good agent in Paris, and his strategy was, you know, make movies in Iceland, connect with your roots, and then let's see where that brings you, you know? So in a roundabout way, you know, I'd love to kind of reinvent myself by coming back home.
Who I have fun with my, there it is.
Who are your heroes? Who are your inspirations? Who are the ones that, like before you went into this movie film composing, and has it changed? And who are your heroes today?
No, it hasn't. Well, maybe it's changed a little bit, but the composer that really made me want to be a film composer is Ennio Morricone. And it's probably, I would venture to say that 75% of film composers will say the same thing, you know. In 50 years it may be Hans Zimmer or somebody else, but you know, for my generation, I think Ennio, and even actually for Hans, it's the same thing. Ennio is his hero. But I mean, along the way, you realize, you know, in a sort of funny way, all film composers are my heroes, because it's a really difficult job, you know, and it's just to work with the director to come up with a tone that serves the film, and then go through maybe 10 rejections for each cue in the film to get to the point where the score is done. And if you have to do that for 90 minutes of music, it's a fight, you know. And so very often I'll go and see a movie at the theater, and I think to myself, you know, 20 years ago I would have said, man, the music is shit. And now I go, man, this must have been a difficult journey for the composer. You know, and I mean, it is a, again, I really think it's, you know, and I want to make sure you don't think I have this deep-seated anger towards film directers, because then I'd be in trouble. But it's such, you know, I would imagine when you've spent 5 or 10 years writing a script or getting the rights to a book or developing something, and you finally get the money together, you get the actors that you want, or maybe actors that you didn't quite want, and somehow you put something together, you have a movie, and now it's like, oh, now I got out the music, you know, and you know, you've fought and basically spent a big chunk of your life getting this done, and now you have to put it in the hands of somebody else. You know, it's you know, it's understandably hard for directors.
Yeah, you can feel for them.
I do feel for them.
Yeah, but now let's go to come to today. You moved to Iceland, but you're still working on a lot of projects in America.
Yeah, and all over the world.
Yeah, tell us about what's going on today and how that's going, being based in the northern part of Iceland.
Well, I mean, I think the miracle of the internet has changed the world, obviously, and it doesn't really doesn't make that big of a difference, really, in terms of getting the work done. And I guess you could say I've sort of paid my dues. You know, I've spent a lot of time meeting people and being present in Hollywood, which leads to knowing people in London and Paris and whatnot. And so I guess I've gotten to the point where I have enough connections and enough recognition of my name that, you know, I'll still get work, and but getting, you know, actually making the music and working with people. You know, most of the films that you showed, I did over Skype with the directors. You know, I mean, we'd meet in the beginning, I'd play them my themes, my ideas, and then we'd Skype, you know, every 2 days or whatever, and then we'll have maybe one more meeting to go through the film, and then we go and record the music. So, you know, it's a changed world, and, you know, I was a little nervous about a month ago when you know, this was still all new, but now after about a month of working on 3 different projects, it's working really well so far.
What are those projects?
Well, I'm doing a couple of television series on NBC, Chicago Fire, Chicago PD, Chicago Med. I don't know how I became.
Mainly Chicago?
I don't know how I became the Chicago guy, but maybe it's the cold weather. I don't know. So, but that all, you know, that's all because of the producers that I met when I was, you know, doing my fellowship for Mike Post. You know, that I'm still working with these guys.
Sorry, guys. Let's take the battery out of this one. Sorry about this. We say in Iceland there's a ghost in our machine. Very, very. Yeah.
I'm not a technician here. There's no one. All right?
It's good. Thank you. Sorry about that.
No worries.
Okay, the Chicago
so,
era.
So all, you know, all civil servants of Chicago have been taken care of. Dog walkers are next, and then parking enforcement. No, but I'm also doing an animation film that's coming out of the Middle East, a new animation studio in Dubai that's making a really beautiful animation film. I'm about to start work on another Icelandic film with Atli Örvarsson. And there's a couple of things brewing in London as well. So, you know, it's I'm really enjoying this new sort of a bit more of an international career than just being in LA and focusing on that part of the world. But, you know, ironically, even when I lived in LA, a lot of the films that I would get were European directors for some reason. So there's some sort of a Euro connection to a lot of it, and now I just feel like, in a way, I mean, the internet, again, has changed the world. It doesn't really matter. It doesn't matter, you know, like you were saying, even for actors in Iceland, they now, you know, audition on their iPhone, you know, and it's just, the world has changed. So, and for, you know, in a good direction.
Very good. I'm going to open up the mic now for you guys. If there are any questions from the audience, I'll hand you the mic if it works.
Try. Hi. How fast do you usually have to write, and how do you distribute your workload in your daily routine?
Well, as fast as I have to is really the answer. You know, if you have a week to write 5 minutes, I'll certainly take the week, because it's you know, you want to make it as good as possible, but very often in television, for example, you'll have a day to write 5 minutes or a couple hours, and then that's how long it takes. You know, it's like writing a paper in school, you know. If you have a month, it takes a month. If you have a week, it takes a week. So, but, you know, to be serious, you know, obviously, film is usually different. You have more time, you know, and thankfully you do, and that's really why I think most composers, in a way, prefer working in film, because you can really put more detail into your work, and you can. It's a bit more ambitious in the sense that you just, the more time you have, the better it'll get, you know. And but you know, necessity always decides, you know.
And do you work with assistants?
Yes, I have 2 assistants in Los Angeles, and on the television series I divide the work, you know. It's simply, I mean, it's too much work. I have to write an hour and a half per week, which is basically 2 symphonies per week, which I don't want to do and nobody should do, and the music would be horrible. So so I delegate that, you know, and quite honestly, I mean, I write the themes. It's again, like I said before, it's so much of it is about solving the problem in the beginning and cracking the nut and sort of like, that's the sound, that's the feel, those are the instruments, and it's sort of like creating the template, and then it can be, then it's a matter of painting by numbers, you know, and sort of like filling in the blanks.
Okay. So you just sort of answered there, or mentioned just by last part, but I was going to ask, but in a way I was going to say, do you ever find you surprise yourself and you say, whoa, where did this come from? Or when you're composing, you discover something that you would have never touched or made before, like a new sound or a new style. And the second part of that is, do you have sort of fetish or a theme that you sometimes fall back on as your sort of go-to? Like, say, an artist really likes to use gray, or they really like to do the grays. Thanks.
Yes and yes. The answer to both is yes. In terms of, and interestingly, both answers have to do with time, because to explore something new and to really dig deep and come up with new ideas and be inventive takes time. You know, it's you know, you gotta almost get past your cliches, you know, because we all have our sort of, you know, that's this thing that comes easy to me, you know, and I can write, you know, my style all day long, but after a while, you know, everybody, including myself, is sick of my style, and then, you know, you have to start inventing and coming up with something new, and so on a movie, when you have the time, that's the beauty of doing film, especially if you work with a director who's into exploring something new. Now, getting back to the writing 5 or 10 minutes in a day, you have to rely on your, you know, on your cliches, or on your sort of safety net, or whatever you want to call it, you know. So, you know, and this is why I love to do both. You know, I love to do very interesting artistic films that allow you to go deeper, and on the other hand, there's something very satisfying about not having time to second guess yourself. You know, it's like you just have to send it out. It's done, and you forget about it. You know, and so you know, I enjoy both sides of it.
Back here. Hello. How close are you working with the sound designer usually, and do they treat you nice as a composer?
The sound designers are lovely people. That's a really good question, and a very important question, but the importance depends on the film, I'd say. You know, I mean, in some films it's not that important really, you know. If it's a very quiet film, quiet music, then they will coexist quite nicely, you know. It gets, it probably gets the most difficult on action movies, or something like, you know, you can only imagine Interstellar, and not only imagine, I know that they work really, really closely, and Hans Zimmer, again, something that he would very often do is to specifically ask the director to bring the sound designer in, so that we wouldn't be competing in the same, you know, frequency range, and also trying to find ways of defining background and foreground, you know, because if you just play music and sound effects together, it all just becomes beige, you know. It's all just like one big blob, you know, But if you actually take the time to sort of almost plan it out and say, you know, you take these 20 seconds and make it a sound design moment, and then the music comes in, etc., etc. It makes for a better movie. So yes, I mean, if we can, or if I can, I prefer to work with them as closely as I can.
Any more? Ara?
Huh.
Hi. My question is concerning what you talked about your style and you change your style differently compared to what kind of movie it is, and that's a positive thing. But it seemed to me like a lot of Icelandic composers, they kind of have a stronger identity or like an individual style. Do you think that is a positive thing, or do you consider yourself to have or I mean, is it better to adapt to the project, or is it better to have a certain kind of strong style, like for example Jón Sigurðs, you know, he has this very unique sound which is almost always not the same, but you understand what I'm trying to say?
Yeah, no.
So.
Well, I think it's a very complicated question in a way, because I think that in some ways it's not a choice, you know. If you have a style, you have a style, and that's what you do. And I think it's more common, you know, people like myself who sort of come in through, almost as filmmakers, you know, we come in through the filmmaking side of it, and it's like, you know, I enjoy doing a score with solo accordion, but I also enjoy doing a score with a 120-piece orchestra and choir. And so, in a way, I'm sort of a musical chameleon in that sense. But within the range of those different scenarios, people tell me that I have a style, you know. And I think it's something that composers, I think all artists struggle with something, the idea of, you know, do I have a voice, you know, and what is my voice, and when is it going to be ready, and when, you know, when will I hear my voice, and etc. You know, so you know, I think that, like I said, I think it's more common from the people that come from the rock and roll pop world, and who sort of start out as artists and as, you know, as recording artists. They have their own style, and they've taken the time to develop that and sort of hone in on something, and people hire them because of that, you know. But then, you know, I'm more of a sort of the craftsman who comes in and applies different kinds of music to different kinds of films. So it's a little bit like comparing apples and oranges. Having said all of that, I believe that the environment you grow up in is inherently a part of who you are. It's inherently a part of your style, your voice, your gestalt, you know, everything that you do. And for me, you know, I grew up in Akureyri in the north, which is like, it's the quietest town on the planet. Nothing ever happens. And so all you do is just look at these huge mountains and wait for anything to happen. So the music sometimes that I write is very calm and moves at a glacial pace, you know, and I think that Icelandic music is like that a lot. It's very sort of, it's very kind of long, it's long gestures. It's very sort of, but when it is violent, it's really violent, like an Icelandic snowstorm, you know. So I think the hardest thing about this whole conversation is the labels, you know, like style. What does that mean? You know, I mean, if I write a country tune and then the day after I write, you know, a 12-tone string quartet, you know, obviously it's different genres, but who knows, maybe you could say that there's some personal style that would be common between the two pieces, you know. So again, very, very complicated answer to a simple question.
Anybody else? Yeah, okay.
Hi. When you're working with a young filmmaker, how do you prefer to communicate with them? How do you get to translate what they want to the language that you understand in terms of making a score that
sign language? Well, that's a really, I think it's one of those unanswerable questions, you know what I mean? Because I think you have to just meet with a person, you have to get to know them, you have to get to know where they come from, you have to get to know you know, a big part of my job is translation. It's like when people say, you know, I want it to be more emotional. That could mean a million things, you know, to some people, like, I mean, everything is emotional, you know, there's like, life is you know, we constantly have emotion, so like, what does that mean? So in other words, I think it's about learning to define a language so that, you know, so that you can actually talk about music, because talking about music is difficult. It's, somebody said talking about music is like dancing about architecture. You know, it's like, it's sort of like, you know, it's a form of communication that doesn't really apply to the other type of communication, you know? So, you know, very often filmmakers use something called a temp track, which I'm sure you know what it is. It's like, you know, using music from another movie. And I think, you know, composers feel two ways about a temp track, because on the one hand, you know, it reduces the endless possibilities of music into something tangible. It's like, I like that, you know, and then you have to translate, what is it about that you like, you know, and then on the other hand, it's like Rams had no temp music, and so you get to create something purely from scratch without your imagination being limited in any sort of way. So, you know, I don't know. Again, I'm getting into these long-winded answers, but I think it's really about getting to know each other, you know, getting to know the person, sitting down and like, you know, it's how do you help a filmmaker to communicate what they need? That's probably the biggest part of my job, to be honest. It's like, how can we talk about this? How can you help me help you to make the movie that you want to make?
Any more? Yeah.
Sorry. So, yeah, okay, so when you're working with a director, again, you kind of sort of answered part of the question I'm going to ask, but do you have a preferred way of spotting? Like when you say in Rams, there's, you know, there's no temp track. Do you ever have someone just give you a film and say, okay, go, or do you always have a spotting session with the director, or do you always sit down, and do you do that, even that session via Skype, like movie start to finish and talk it through, or is there a preferred way you like to work that way?
Well, I prefer to have a spotting session if I possibly can, and the times that I'm trying to think, there's one director I worked with who didn't want to spot, and I tried to convince him that how am I going to know what this film is about if you don't talk to me about it? You know, he's like, no, I think you should just do what you want to do, and of course it was a disaster. And because, you know, we're dealing with such intangible things, you know. Movies are about emotion. Movies are about, you know, it's some sort of a thing that you can't really, you know, you can't just send somebody, here's the blueprint, now make this shoe, you know. It's not like that. It's it has to be a dialogue. It has to be a cooperation. So, you know, spotting sessions are very much preferred as far as I'm concerned. Now, spotting sessions are one of the strangest things that I've experienced, because spotting a 2-hour movie invariably takes like 8 hours. And you're so exhausted after doing it that it's hard to describe. And I don't know what it is. It seems to be there's so much like, I don't know, intensity and like focus and attention, and just, you know, you have to be so open and just sensitive, really. And so it's an exhausting job. But, you know, again, it's all about trying to get to that essence of what are we trying to make, you know? And sometimes temp tracks are really helpful, but it depends on, I think, you know what I think it depends on is how personal the film is for the director. And sometimes, you know, we're making entertainment, you know, then it's not that personal in a way, in the sense that it's like, of course we want to make a great movie, but this has been done before, and this is sort of the emotion I need here, blah, blah, blah. It's more of a production. But when you're making something from that's more artistic, if you will, or more personal, it's a trickier proposition, and in those kinds of films, I think it's helpful not to have a temp track, or the best possible option is to write the temp track. In other words, like on Rams, when I wrote the theme before they shot the film, we already had the temp track. So, you know, then there's some sort of gestalt in the, you know, it becomes a holistic piece of art rather than a production.
Last question.
Talking about the spotting, do you find that the spotting can change once you start composing the cues, and maybe does that happen on the more artistic projects rather than the more, I don't know how does it work on a Hollywood feature film? Once you said the spotting, is that really fixed in stone, or?
It usually does develop, you know, because the best laid plans aren't always, you know, bulletproof, you know, and you may think, you know, wouldn't it be great if there was this big pipe organ over this guy walking down the street, and then you try it and it's a horrible idea, and so you have to kind of change that. But also, in terms of just where music starts and where it ends, and where it ramps up, where it slows down, etc., etc., those kinds of things, you know, you make a plan, but they change because it becomes a dance between the music and the film, and the film, if you're listening, will tell you what it wants. So, you know, it's a fascinating left brain, right brain kind of exercise, you know, because it has to be mathematical, but at the same time it has to be artistic. So it's a constant sort of metamorphosis, you know. It keeps changing.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you guys very much. We're going to end up by playing here a short video. This is like a collage of Icelandic pop music in foreign films or in movies from all over the world. And I would like to thank you very much on behalf of Riff and IMX, and Atli, especially you. Thank you.
Thank you.